be seated.
All right, the state having rested, would the defense like to give an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Very good.
I plead guilty. I plead guilty to the first-degree murder of Richard Ivancic. I plead guilty to the first-degree murder of Laura Ivancic. I plead guilty to the first-degree murder of Nicholas Ivancic. That is what Shelby Nealy said when he accepted responsibility for those 3 murders. And on that same day, he pled guilty to the lesser offense of manslaughter and was sentenced to 30 years for this homicide of Jamie Ivancic. We have taken a journey in this courtroom over the last week and a half. We've heard the unthinkable. We felt the sorrow, the gut-wrenching grief, and the overwhelming sadness. And yet, the law says you are never, ever required to impose a sentence of death in the worst imaginable case possible, ever. The judge instructs you, and the law says we listen to all the things that we've listened to coming from these victims' family members. And again, it's heartfelt, so incredibly sad, and so painful. And what do we tell you to do with that? What does the law tell you to do with that? It tells you, hey, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, put that stuff over here because you can't consider it, because it's not an aggravator. So while we honor and we respect it, and we respect and honor them, you have to put those things over here. You've heard horrific facts. You've seen gruesome photos that no one should have to see. And again, you're still never compelled nor required to impose a sentence of death. Another journey you are going to take this week is one that describes how this little boy right here got from here to here. Your job is not easy. You probably never imagined that you would go from being at a coffee shop or speaking to friends about politics or your general beliefs on the death penalty to the reality of having to come into this courtroom and actually consider it. Some people say that the crimes and the facts are enough, but you are not those people. Those people were excused. You all took an oath, and you made a promise and said that you wanted to know more. You needed to know more. about Shelby, more information before you can make a decision individually, because it is an individual moral decision about whether he lives or dies. And let's be clear, the only way Mr. Nealy is going to come out of the custody and control of the Department of Corrections is in a pine box, either way. Mitigating circumstances are reasons for life. They are not excuses. They are not defenses. Because, of course, we all know he pled guilty. They are reasons why the death penalty would not be appropriate in this circumstance. Unlike the aggravators, which must be found by all of you collectively as a group, unanimously, beyond a reasonable doubt, mitigators do not work like that. Each and every one of you decide individually what mitigation is important to you. The mitigation that may be important to Mr. Call may be different than Mr. Sandiford, may be different.
Excuse me.
Maybe approach.
Yes.
Circumstances in this case, oops, sorry. The weight that each of you give to the mitigating circumstances in this case may be different. One of you may give more weight or less weight to mitigating factors than others. So let's take a summarized journey of how Shelby got from this kid right here to over here. You will hear from various experts about how his life and his brain impacted him psychologically. His mom, Lisa Svensson, was married to a man named Bobby Nealy. Before, during, and after her pregnancy with Shelby, Bobby Nealy physically abused Lisa Svensson. Now, when Shelby was just shy of a year old, Lisa's mother, they were living in Texas at the time, Lisa's mother came down and got Lisa and got Shelby and moved them back up to Ohio. Sometime after that, Lisa met and then married Paul Svensson. And by all accounts, things were going well. She's a good mom. He's a good stepdad. And Shelby really never heard from his biological dad, Bobby, till he was about 15 years old. During this period of time growing up, Shelby was diagnosed with ADHD and placed on medication. You also hear about his depression diagnosis and what that means and how that affected him. But significantly, and I'll just say super important in this case, is the following. When Shelby was 15 years old, he heard from his dad, so his biological dad, Bobby. So he wanted to go down to Texas and see his biological dad. His mom had some concerns about that because she didn't want Shelby to be abused by his dad. She felt a little bit more comfortable because Bobby had remarried and so there was a woman in the house. So Shelby came down to Texas, and he was literally there for maybe a day before Bobby Nealy's wife decided she was going to have sex with him at the age of 15. That's how old he was. And it didn't just happen once, it happened more than once. After Shelby visits, he comes back to Ohio, and he's even texting the stepmom, and she's not answering. He doesn't really understand why. He's texting his dad, trying to have some kind of communication with his dad. Dad's not answering. And one day, after Shelby's 17th birthday, Shelby's biological dad, Bobby, shoots himself and commits suicide. After that, everything changed. Everything. His mom and his stepdad will tell you about that. They'll tell you about the changes they saw in him. He actually went to counseling for depression, but he was a 17-year-old kid. So he went 2 times, and then he didn't want to go anymore, like a typical teenager. You will hear from a woman by the name of Rachel Rigby. She and Shelby became friends at a place called Hidden Valley Campground. Their families would go there for the summers, and they knew each other for 2 summers. And at one point they started kind of dating, I guess, at the campground. They never had any sexual relations. They lived actually about 40 minutes away from each other, 45 minutes away from each other. So never saw each other except for those 2 summers at the campground. But they would take walks together. They would talk with each other. They would help each other when one of them had something going on they wanted to talk about. And Shelby wrote a poem about his father. And he gave it to Rachel. Rachel kept that poem. She actually took a picture of it. And you're going to hear that poem. It's a poem about Shelby's father. Dr. Campbell, who is a clinical psychologist who is an expert in trauma, will come in and explain to you about the PTSD that Shelby suffers from the suicide of his father and blaming himself, to the homelessness that you heard about on the interview that his mother didn't know about because Shelby told her that he was staying with friends when he really wasn't and he was homeless. And also the trauma from a domestic violence from Jamie. And don't get me wrong, Shelby, you've already seen it, has a toxic relationship with females. But it's important, and we'll get to that in a minute, why the domestic violence with Jamie is important. And you will also hear about that from Dr. Campbell. The perfect storm is brewing because what makes a seemingly normal person do something like this? Shelby had several head traumas. They are documented in the medical records. You will hear about them from a neuropsychologist by the name of Dr. Woe. It is important for you to understand, and it will become important for you to understand, how brain damage impacts a person's reaction to trauma. The abuse by his stepmother, the suicide of his dad, toxic relationships with women, shaped the rest of his life and affected his choices. As I said, you will hear from the neuropsychologist, Dr. Woe, and he will tell you about neuropsychological testing, objective testing, that he performed on Mr. Nealy. And he will tell you about those findings. And you will hear that those findings that he had are corroborated by the medical records from Mr. Nealy's past that we got from different hospitals. You will hear about an incident where he was hit by Jamie with a broomstick, and he had an intracranial bleed. Neurosurgery was recommended. Neurosurgery was recommended. He didn't get it, but it was recommended. Another incident where she hit him over the head with a frying pan. And another incident, not involving her, that was in 2012, where he was choked and fell and hit his head against the wall. You will also hear from Dr. Woe about Shelby's IQ score. And there's something called a verbal IQ score and a nonverbal IQ score. And the split, the difference between those two, you will hear is very remarkable, and he will explain to you why. The law requires that the aggravators that the state is to prove are to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt unanimously. So all of you together must agree. And I'm going to take one of those examples, the prior violent felony example, that he either committed a capital crime or a crime of violence. And the reason that we tell you about Jamie's violence on him is not because that justifies him killing her. It's because it's going to be important to the weight that you give that particular aggravator. If you get past that step, that's where your collective decision ends. And then you individually decide if the aggravators are sufficient enough, the ones that you found. Then you go on to decide whether the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating circumstances. And this is that weighing that we talked about before. And you will not be limited at all in what mitigators you find. Even if we didn't mention something and you thought, oh, this could be a mitigator, you can find that as a mitigator. Anything in your heart that you consider to be mitigation. Remember, you said you wanted to know more. You needed to know more. Only if the aggravators are sufficient and outweigh the mitigators, only then can you consider the death penalty as an option. And these are all individual moral decisions. Again, regardless of anything, you never have to impose a sentence of death, and you may always, always consider mercy. Since you all walked in here last Monday, the judge, the bailiffs, the lawyers, you've been told where to sit, when you can go to lunch, when you need to be back, whether you need to stand up or sit down. But it's you all individually who actually have the power in this courtroom. It's individual power that you all have in making this decision. You will have many more answers when we're done here. And I did forget one thing. Some of you wanted to know, will he serve a purpose if he's in prison? And you will hear from a prison expert who will tell you in 6.5 years, Shelby has had no disciplinary reports, and you will hear from this expert about the things that he can accomplish in prison and the help that he can give in prison. 3 other things you will know by the end of this case, and some you already know, is did he accept responsibility? Yes, he did. Will he be punished? Yes, he will. And will society be safe? Yes, they will. We have met under the most tragic of circumstances. Let us not leave under the most tragic of circumstances. Sentence Shelby Nealy to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thank you.
All right, defense.